Hey everyone, Lee with LG Speed and Custom here, and in this video we are going to lower Kirby's 40 Ford Coupe. Well, it's Monday morning here at the shop, and today we are working on Kirby's 40 Ford. I thought I'd just do like a little video on kind of like the day-to-day stuff that I do here in the shop. For those of you that don't know Kirby, last year we did quite a few videos on Kirby's 32 Roadster. We put a quick change rear end in it, built a Nerf bar, put the Buick disc brakes. They look like Buick drum brakes, but they're actually disc brakes from Roadster Supply. We put some of those in the front. Anyways, there's a few videos on Kirby's car. Kirby just bought this car. It came up from Washington. So a couple weeks back, we did a bunch of mechanical work on this car just to get it through inspection here in BC where I live. When a car comes from another province, or in this case another country, coming up from the US, before you can plate it and put it on the road, it needs to pass an inspection. So we put a new master cylinder in it, tires, new brake lines on the back, brakes, stuff like just little stuff to make it pass the mechanical inspection. After that was done, one of the things that Kirby had to do was put new tires on this car, and the tires that were on it aren't available anymore. This car's got 14-inch rims on the front. 14-inch tires are hard to get, so he did manage to get some new 14-inch tires, but they're not the same size that was on the car, and as a result, there is a little bit of a fender gap right now, and Kirby wants to close that gap up just a little bit. We're not going to slam this car, we're just going to lower it a little bit so that this tire sits a little more in the fender, and we eliminate this gap here. So to lower this car, I think we're going to try to go for a 1-inch drop to close that gap up. And in order to do that, we're going to cut the coils. So I know what you're thinking already. What are you talking about coil springs? This car doesn't have coil springs. It should have like a straight axle with a transverse spring. You know, maybe a little drop to it, reverse eye. Not this car. This car was built in, I think Kirby said 1980 or 1981. So it's kind of at that like transition era where hot rods were turning more into street rods, and guys were starting to put like, you know, a little more modern front ends in it. This car happens to have a ultra modern, for 1980 technology, Corvair front clip in it. Corvairs were, their front ends they were pretty common to use in hot rods in the 70s and early 80s. Kind of, they were like the transition between a straight axle front end to like the Mustang 2 style IFS front ends that more people are aware of today. Before the Mustang 2 front end became popular, the Corvair front end was the popular one. So that's what this car has in it. I've worked on a few cars with Corvair front ends in them. They drive nice. I can see why they were a popular front end to put in. They give you power steering. This car's got power steering on it. It's got disc brakes, independent. It drives just like a Corvair would, which compared to a 40 Ford Coupe, you know, is pretty modern feeling. The downside to the Corvair front ends is in what year are we in right now? 2025. Man, the last like 4 or 5 years have just kind of been just one big blur. Anyways, yeah, we're in 2025 right now, which means Corvair parts are a little bit hard to get, so probably not a front end that you're going to see very often anymore. But we can still lower it. It's just like any other front end. We're going to undo the lower ball joint, drop the spring out, cut one coil, put it back together. First things first, before we do that, we're going to measure where we're at now so that we have a base. Regular viewers of the channel that have watched me lower cars before, you know I always do this. I always just put a little bit of tape on the fender, grab a Sharpie and a tape measure, and we're going to measure. We are at 26 inches. Right there. So now we know where our like start point is. When we cut one coil and put it back together, we'll be able to see how low exactly we want. We don't need to be like exactly 1 inch. We just want to close this gap up so that it looks nicer. One coil might give us 3/4 of an inch, might give us 1.5 inches. I don't know. That's the weird thing with Corvair front ends. I haven't done enough of them that I know exactly how many coils to cut to get, you know, the exact height. Whereas with like a 50s car or something like when we did Shannon's Meteor or 49 Meteor, I knew that 1.5 coils would give you exactly 3 inches. So this might be a little bit of a trial and error. We'll just have to cut it, put it back together, take it apart, see what happens. Now that we've got our height figured out, we can go ahead and lift the car in the air, start pulling it apart. So up in the air here, what we need to do to get this coil spring out is we need to undo this lower ball joint right here, which should come out pretty easy because I just put this ball joint in last week. We're gonna undo that ball joint. We gotta undo this little trailing arm radius rod. We've got a sway bar clamp right here, and then we've got this bolt that holds the bottom of the shock in. If we unbolt all that and have a jack underneath the hub here to hold all that up, we should be able to, actually no, we don't want the jack there, we want the jack under here so that when we lower the jack down, it will slowly let the pressure off the spring. We can take the spring out, cut one coil, and then put it back together. I'm gonna start with the radius rod. It's just 2 bolts on the bottom. Do our sway bar next, and this is just to allow the lower control arm to swing out of the way enough to get the coil out. Shock next. Got a couple spacers in there. Make sure you don't lose those. Now everything should be undone except for the ball joint. We'll bring the jack over for that. So I'm gonna put the jack underneath the control arm here, and I'm gonna lift it up just until it like starts to lift the weight off of like the weight of the car. It'll just start to come off the jack stands, and then we can undo our ball joint. It's wanting to twist the control arm. I might put a block of wood under there so it picks it up more evenly. There we go. Need some side cutters. All right, cotter pins out. I'll just blast this nut off. So I'm not taking the nut all the way off. I'm gonna unthread it so that there's, I don't know, 4 or 5 threads still on, and that way we can lower this down, and the ball joint is gonna, it's like under pressure in there. So we want to be able to release the pressure, but not have it like explode. So by leaving the nut on there a little bit, the nut will stop it from shooting out. That sounded like it came out. Oh no, it didn't. Okay, we might need to hit the bottom of the spindle with a hammer just to break that loose. So by hitting right here with the hammer, it kind of shocks this, which makes it so it kind of pops out. I might have to turn the steering so I can get to it a little better. There we go. Okay, I'm going to put the jack back up now that the ball joints pop loose. Just a little bit. And then we'll take the nut off. And now when we lower the jack, the spring should come out. Just like that. We've got our coil on the bench here. We're going to cut one coil off the top. The reason we're cutting off the top is because this guy down here is kind of shaped so that it fits specifically in the coil arm, or like in the coil pocket in the control arm, and the top kind of goes into just like a flat area, so it's not as crucial to have this exact pigtail end on here. One coil means we're literally going to cut right there so that one full coil is removed. There's a lot of, like, some people get really concerned about cutting coils. They think it's a bad thing. I've been cutting coils for decades. It's fine. One coil, you're not going to change your ride quality at all. I used to race autocross, and I would buy like heavy springs for like heavier spring rates to go in and out of corners and stuff. And when you buy like race springs, they usually kind of come in like generic lengths, and then you cut the coils to get them to fit the car and dial in your ride height. As you cut coils, it increases the spring rate. The more coils you cut, the stiffer your springs are going to get, which is especially on like 50s cars, big 50s cars, that kind of helps, because those cars in like stock form, they kind of drive like a bathtub full of water. So by increasing that spring rate, it kind of makes them, it just improves the handling a bit. If you were to, like, to kind of explain the theory of that, if you were to take this spring and make it like this big and compress it, each one of these coils will move so much. Whereas if you make it shorter and shorter, like say you get right down to like the last two springs, the same amount of pressure is not going to compress those two springs the same way as it will compress, you know, a whole stack of them. So I hope that kind of makes sense. Anyways, let's cut this coil. I'm just going to use regular old zip disc on the Makita grinder here. Put some glasses on. Boom. There we go. Now we'll just put this back together. Do the same on the other side. So if we measure the distance of this coil here, we are 1.5 inches that we have shortened this. However, that doesn't necessarily mean the car is going to sit 1.5 inches, because when this has weight under it, you know, this spacing isn't as drastic. So once it's back in the car, we might be 1 inch down, we might be 3/4 of an inch down. I'm not sure. That's kind of the trial and error part. We'll put it back in and see what it looks like. From here, it's literally just the reverse of how we took it apart. We're going to put the spring back in there, put the control arm kind of back in place, use the floor jack to compress the spring, and put our ball joint back together. Make sure that this little pigtail goes back in that same little recessed pocket. That's all there is to it. Gonna throw the wheels back on this thing, then we'll put it on the ground, back it out, drive it back in, and we'll remeasure it. The reason why we want to drive it before we measure it is because as the weight of the car comes back on the ground, the suspension is going to be kind of loaded up. So you gotta roll the wheels back and forth a bit to let the suspension kind of like relax. Both wheels are tight. I'm putting 2x4s under the tires because when I put this up in the air, the jack had just minimal clearance to this chin right here, which as you can see is probably hit a curb or two before. All right, let's go for a little drive and see what happens. We don't have to go far. I'm literally just gonna back the car out, drive it back in again, and then we can remeasure. And if it didn't go enough, all we have to do is just take the whole thing apart again and cut like maybe another half a coil off, which is fine. All right, what's our tape measure say? We were at 26 before. We are at 24 and an eighth. So we went down just an eighth of an inch more than we wanted, which I think is fine. And this side came down exactly 1 inch. We nailed it, first try. Boom. I guess that's why I'm a professional. I think that did the trick. Look at the tire gap now. From the top of the tire to the bottom of the fender, we have like the same distance front and back, which is exactly what Kirby was after. Boom. Gotta like that. All right, well, the next step from here is Kirby's gonna take the car to get a wheel alignment done. We're done. Just gonna take the car for just a little burn over these speed bumps here, just to make sure that everything's happy. We don't have any like weird clunks or rattles. I think we're good. All right, and it's lunchtime too. Perfect timing. What a great Monday. Might close the door and, nah. Just gonna say I'll close the door and run the car over to Kirby. Kirby's shop is literally across the street, so it's pretty convenient for him. There we go. There's how to lower the front of your 40 Ford with a Corvair front suspension in it, or in this case, Kirby's 40 Ford. So again, this video is just a little bit of like the regular day-to-day shop stuff that I do here. A lot of the videos, I kind of focus on my own cars, unless, well, actually that's not true. It's probably 50-50, but anyways, here's Monday morning at LG Speed and Custom. If you enjoyed this video and want to support the channel and get yourself some LG Speed and Custom merch, head over to lgspeedcustom.com. We got lots of t-shirts, parts. For American viewers right now, with the Canadian exchange rate, the shirts work out to like 19 bucks each, which is the deal of the century. So head over there and get yourself a shirt. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts on Kirby's 40 Ford Coupe. I think it's a great little car. I'd happily drive it.
See you later, Kirby.